Welcome to Master of Science with host Professor James McCanney. The good professor's career spans 50 years as a university teacher, scientist, and engineer. Each week, he will explore the rapidly changing world of science as many long-held theories are crumbling under the weight of new data. He will cover the fields of geology, archaeology, meteorology, oceanography, space science, astronomy, cosmology, biological evolution, virology, energy, mathematics, and more. So please welcome the host of Master of Science, James McCanney.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Tonight, a lot of important topics to cover, and the first of which, as we approach the Yuletide, the Christmas season, you are going to be bombarded with some misinformation. And this started literally decades ago. So I've done some radio shows, some specials. I think I was on Coast to Coast AM doing a radio special on the Christmas star. What is it? But what you're going to hear from the mainstream media, which is totally incorrect, is that it was a planetary alignment. And just you peel back the very first onion layer on the planetary alignment theory, and it doesn't make any sense. Planetary alignment they happen all the time. There's probably a dozen of them every year. Planetary alignments are not something special, something you would wait thousands of years for. These happen regularly. So that's one thing. And the other thing is they don't last. They only last like for a night, and then they move on, and they don't continue. The Christmas star was there for years, because we know. And the interesting thing about the Christmas star story is that three wise men from the east, we think they were from Ethiopia, Persia, and India. These were the three magi. Totally different places on the planet, very far remotely removed from one another. And they saw this sign in the sky, which had been prophesied thousands of years earlier, literally. And so they saw it, they packed their bags, they started moving. And the celebration right now is the Three Kings Day, which is after Christmas. It's all the way into the New Year. And of course, Christmas in the Western world is celebrated differently than in the Eastern Orthodox world. So I just want to clarify that. I'm aware of this, but we're talking about the Three Kings, the Magi, and their trip. Now, it was different back in those days. You just didn't jump in your Ferrari, drive across the desert, and get there in a day and a half. This was a trip where you went through perilous country, you needed security, you needed all the supplies for all the people, the entourage. This was a big, major event. This, they show in the nativity scene, the three magi there with their gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I just want to talk about the gifts for just a second. Symbolic of richness of a king, gold. Frankincense, also commensurate of a kingly person. And myrrh, which was the prophecy, in a sense, of his death on the cross, which was, of course, all these events major in the Christian religions. In fact, a number of the other major religions around the world were based on Christianity. And anyway, be that as it may. But so Christ was not poor when he was born, having gold. And of course, they left very soon to go to Egypt. They know the town they lived in, even in Egypt. I can't pronounce it, so I'm not going to try to on the air. But the whole early history was known. And Mary, just want to clarify some things that are not clear. Mary herself was of a very, very wealthy family. And of course, she lived in what we now call the Mideast. But her uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, excuse me, was a very, very wealthy Roman businessman. He was an Israelite who lived in Rome, and he supplied Rome, the Roman army, with metal that he got from England. And at the time, the Roman armies could not penetrate England at all. That was well into, 300 AD before the Roman armies finally were able to get even a foothold in England. So anyway, Joseph of Arimathea was an Israelite, and his contacts, let's put it that way, were in England, and that's where the Roman army got their metal from. So he was probably one of the wealthiest people in all of Rome. Well known apart from anything you find in the Bible, and of course, he was the guy who took the body of Christ after the crucifixion. And so if you remember, he went there, and it had to be, by Roman law, it had to be a family member. So he was the family member that went, took the body, and then they went and put it in, and then the rest of that story we all know from history. But Joseph was a rich dude, and there's good evidence that Christ spent a good deal of his youth with Joseph of Arimathea. He'd been to England. He had been to what we believe is India. And Joseph of Arimathea, and this is a topic I'll be talking about in the future, had an extensive library, like more than the public library type of library. He had an extensive library. And when after the crucifixion, he took the two Marys and allegedly the cross and the chalice from the Last Supper and other artifacts from Christ's life and took them to England. And eventually there was an abbey built there, and that's another whole story. Eventually the Romans came in and burned down the abbey, and what was left of the library, Joseph took his library to, and what later became Glastonbury Abbey, where they were maintaining the records, the library of Joseph of Arimathea, and the Romans came in a number of hundred years later and burned it down. And so the trust, there was a trust, and if you want to call it by modern terms there, and they got as many of the books out of there as much as the library they could. And then when, after the fire, they went back and picked up the remnants, and that is what is the content of what today we call the Kolbrin. So anyway, that's another topic, Kolbrin, and do not buy the one on Amazon. That's a phony, there were some people who scammed pretending they wrote the Kolbrin, and the Kolbrin is not a Bible, it's a collection of ancient books. And how do I know about this? Because I was one of the first 3 people in the United States to have a copy of that book that was created from the remnants of Joseph of Arimathea's library. And so what it tells you very specifically is that the Old Testament, the way it is presented today, relative to Noah's flood, Moses bringing the Israelites out of Egypt, those were events that were commensurate with large comets in the solar system. And so when you understand these things, and the Christmas star being a comet, this is a show that I'm going to be doing in the future about all of the references to big comets and its very special comets that are in the Bible. That's a story unto itself. And so just quickly, the Noah's flood was where Earth passed through the tail of a comet for an extended period of time. And it was a great flood. It came from outside of Earth. It rose, the ocean levels rose. There was a tremendous mass extinction of the human population, and it changed our atmosphere. Remember that after the Noah's flood, the atmosphere was changed, and for the first time they saw a rainbow, because that indicating that the atmosphere was quite different before the Noah's flood. And I talked about this also on the show. This is another topic I'll be covering, is that the current atmosphere of Earth is insufficient to support human beings to live properly and to regenerate their body properly on a daily basis. And that is why the upsurge in hyperbaric chambers is occurring, because what that is, it's a doubling or even tripling of the atmospheric pressure of Earth's atmosphere, and a large increase in oxygen content, sometimes up to 100% oxygen. And this is used for people that have illnesses, all kinds of human maladies. But anyway, the atmosphere was drastically changed during the Noah's flood epoch, and that was because Earth passed through the tail of this comet. Okay, that's one historical comet. The other one was when Moses is leading the Israelites out of Egypt. And now, by the way, I have talked about this extensively. It's in my 24-year radio show, in my books, etc. So this is a topic I have covered greatly. One of my books is called Atlantis to Tesla, the Kolbrin Connection. And so I was getting back to the story of the Kolbrin. I was one of the first 3 people in the United States to get a copy of a Kolbrin. And the way this occurred is there was a gentleman who was a big fan, and I talked to him almost on a daily basis. He's now deceased. And he would research all of the different radio programs going on and keep me abreast of what was going on. And this is back in the early 2000s, something like that. At any rate, he remembered when he was little, his grandmother, who had been from England, showed him a book. It was called the Bronze Book. And there were other books associated with the Bronze Book. And he remembered it, but he tried, then he was a construction worker. And one day he just said, he started studying and researching. And so by the time I met him through the radio show, my original radio show, he was very well versed in all kinds of things. But he went on a search for the books, these ancient books, and he didn't know much about them other than his grandmother had read to him from the Bronze Book. I think it was called the Bronze Book of England. And of course, it was part of the remnant of these books that had been passed down. One thing they're very clear on is that man had had many major disasters in his upbringing, in his history, in those years. So now they're talking about, just to throw a curveball in here, all you hear now about on major radio shows is the Younger Dryas period, 11,000 years ago, all these catastrophes happened. No. The Noah's flood and the Venus event, which was Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, were thousands of years ago, well within that 11,000 year mark, probably half of that. And I don't pick dates, by the way. I don't pick dates, and so I'm not going to give dates because they're open to interpretation and criticism, because we don't know. We don't have serious good dates. The best person on this is Velikovsky. There's no question he was the scholar of all scholars dealing with dates, and he put the date of the demise of the mastodons, the Venus event, where Venus, the big comet, came through the solar system, ravaged Earth on 2 different occasions, which the Maya talk about, the Inca talk about. Every civilization on planet Earth talks about the Venus event, where Venus was a comet. It was captured by Jupiter. And if you remember, I did a debate on Coast to Coast AM with Dr. David Morrison. It was David Morrison, the head of NASA, the Near-Earth Asteroid Project, where they try and identify things that are going to collide into Earth. And he was Carl Sagan's favorite student. So anyway, they set up a debate between Dr. David Morrison and myself, who represented my theoretical work on the electric nature of the solar system. And of course, I'd been at Cornell And so this was a very highly watched debate on the coast, or listened to, I should say, on Coast to Coast AM. And the host was George Norrie. He called me up and he said, Jim, we want to do this debate. Will you do this? And I said, sure. But we are going to set some ground rules. And so before the debate, I called up and talked to Dr. David Morrison a number of times. And we said, we're going to keep this on a non-adversarial basis. It's going to be based on science and facts and informed discussion. Not, he said, she said, but him as representative of standard traditional astronomy, astrophysics, and space science, and me as representative of my work, and also, in a sense, defending Velikovsky, who claimed that Venus was a comet which became the planet Venus. And of course, my work substantiates that. It tells how comets, large comets, can become planets using the tail drag, and that's the big piece that was always missing. So you see above me here the plasma discharge comet model. And by the way, it says 30-year anniversary. That poster is from 20 years ago. So this is kind of about 50th anniversary now. But anyway, the debate happened, and we went there and had the debate. And at the end, they had a call-in vote. This call-in vote was occurring during the interview, a full-length coast-to-coast, like 3 hours or something. And much to my surprise, I won the debate with the call-in vote. So it was, to me, it was a surprise. I thought I was going to lose 100-0, frankly, because of all of the fame, and you have Carl Sagan, Dr. David Morrison representing NASA, all the money they put into dousing Velikovsky, and the public clearly believed my story, not NASA's story. Very interesting. So getting back to the comets in the Bible, this is a topic I'll be picking up and really doing a much more extensive series of lectures on this in this show. It's on my list to do. But I wanted to bring this together, getting back to the Christmas star being a very special comet. And I gave an example one time. I've done a number of interviews on this very topic. But an example I gave would be a comet with a very specific orbit and possibly a triple nucleus, something like that, something so unusual that you would just not see it. It's something that when you saw it in the sky, it was very, very clear. And so the three magi were astrologers. And of course, astrology was the science of looking and studying the stars prior to astronomy taking off and becoming this science. But you could almost mix them together, because astrology very much studied the positions of the planets, and then it was an empirical science relative to the human condition. And I talked about this before, where when I was working with the Russian scientists at the University of Novosibirsk, the psychology department got wind of this and started setting in on the daily meetings. And so what happened was they were studying unborn babies in the womb of these mothers, and the babies were reacting to planetary alignments. They could see the babies reacting. So here the baby is there. It has all of the senses that it has, the smell, touch, sight, everything has not really been activated yet. And so the baby can hear noises and can react to noises and somebody touching the stomach or something like that. But they were reacting to the positions of the planets, and they didn't know why. And so my work explained that the planetary alignments were electrical and sending out electrical signals, and the babies were picking this up, giving astrology a fundamental scientific basis. And so you still hear a lot of people poo-pooing the astrology as some kind of pseudoscience or fake science or something, but there's actually a scientific basis for what they've discovered in astrology. Okay, so getting back to the Christmas star, Excuse me. Getting back to the Christmas star, they discovered it in the east. This is the story from the Magi. They discovered it in the east, but they followed it to the west. Well, wait a minute. How does that happen? Well, that happens in this good example is Venus the planet. Sometimes you see it as the morning star, sometimes you see it as the evening star. And that's because it crosses around behind the sun, and when it's on the right side of the sun, relative to our point of view, it then would be in the morning sky, and then when it's on the left side of the sun, it would be in the evening sky. And so that's what happens. So comets do that all the time also. Sometimes we've had many comets recently. This, A3 comet did that, excuse me, where it passed around behind the sun, or it could pass in between us and the sun. Either way, it's on one side of the sun, then the other. But I think it was the A3 comet, but there was one recently that did the same thing. So comets do this. This is a property of comets that are in orbit around the sun, and the Earth is moving in its orbit. And so relative to us and the sun, at one point it's in the eastern sky, then at another point it's in the western sky. And so this is a property of comets, not planetary alignments. Planetary alignments last for a day or so. Now, they followed it to the west, and it came to rest over this place in Bethlehem. Now, how does that happen? Well, there again, you have to understand planetary orbits and how these things work. And so, for example, Venus is another good example where it comes out to an extreme angle from the sun, and it stops there, and then it starts moving back. But with a comet, it could be such that we're looking down a parabolic line, and it just sits there relative to us. As it's moving out and we're moving in our orbit around the sun, it just sits there. So those are possibilities. But what really happened, we don't know. I'm just saying that these are possibilities. But planetary alignment? No, forget it. Planetary alignment, but they are pounding on this, and they have professional astronomers and theologians and internet hacks and everybody else on the planet trying to present to you that the Christmas star was a planetary alignment. No. But you'll find that everything that has to do with comets, when you get up into the intel agencies, and just to explain how this works, for people who have not, and maybe you're new to this, you're still wearing those rosy sunglasses on how the world works. The intel agencies, including topped off by the CIA is the police force of the World Bank, housed in Langley, Virginia, their central location, but all over the world, operating and managing at the behest of the World Bank, which is operated out of the Rothschild banking system in Europe, which has its main banking center in Rome. Okay, you have the Bank of England is another one. You have the United States, which is the army, the muscle, let's put it that way, of the European banking system. And they pretty much have controlled the world for a very long time, and people are not aware of this. But the point is that they also control the world of science. So all of the garbage science that you see presented on a lot of the major radio shows have an absolute plethora of guests who just present absolute garbage to dissuade you or to move you away from what's really going on. So the biggest events in man's history have been caused by large comets. The Noah's event, the Venus event, the one that Moses taking the Israelites out of Egypt, and the 7 plagues are all related to the comet. The vermin coming out of the ground, the red hand of death, the poisonous gases in the air. It's all related to comets. This is, anyway, I could go on. These will be topics of future shows where I'm going to go into a lot of detail. But back to the Christmas star. The only thing it could have been was a comet. with a long tail, and we do have references to that in the Bible, and it's not something that everybody saw. This is something that only the wise men, knowing the predictions, the prophecies, would have understood and noticed. Okay, so I was just going to take a little time and talk about this subject, but it's important to lay this out. So when you see all of that misinformation hitting the press as we move up towards Christmas time about the Christmas star being a planetary alignment, understand that that is exactly what it is. Misinformation targeted at you, the public, to make you think that it was related to planetary alignment, somehow related to Christmas stars. No, not at all. The Christmas star was a comet. And there's some other very special things, properties of comets that deal with the Christmas story, but I'm not going to go into that tonight. I want to jump up to the other topics. First of all, I want to follow up to last week's show where I talked about the Jupiter winds and talk about being exactly right on. I always kid offline, I shouldn't do this on the show, but it just aggravates me when I'm right about these things all the time. But it's because I have experience. In one of my books, there's a chapter, it's called You Cannot Predict the Weather If You Don't Know What Causes the Weather. And so if you would have seen, literally the hurricanes I talked about came true. And if you lived any place in northeastern United States, you were nailed with the Jupiter winds. And blizzards, whiteout blizzards, 50 plus mile per hour wind. That's a hurricane. Like I say, it's an overland hurricane. So I jokingly call them himicanes. But we're talking straight line winds, and I'll show some diagrams here of the wind patterns. Now this last week I said if you for your homework from the show, go to just search on Google. It's called Null Null School, Null School, and wind map, and it's a worldwide wind map that shows all the winds. And so here are the wind patterns that are relative to that the hurricane that was covering North America. Now, when I was a kid growing up in the upper Midwest, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and then down as far as Indiana, Ohio, and sometimes all the way down to Florida, there was something called the Alberta Clipper. And this was a jet stream that came, it would wrap up around the Arctic Circle and then come down. So you have all these wavy wind patterns up around the Arctic Circle. And then all of a sudden one of them would just come shooting down across Alberta and hit the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and sometimes this would push as far south as Florida, where it would literally could destroy the fruit crops, the citric fruit crops of Florida. Excuse me. But that is a typical Alberta Clipper. What we were seeing this past week was not an Alberta Clipper. It was a cyclonic storm with a low pressure cell that moved across the Great Lakes region, dragging cold air down from Hudson Bay and moisture, mind you. And so you would find that the Dakotas, the northwestern Minnesota, Wisconsin got a royal dose of blackout, literally called. It's a blinding snowstorm that's so severe, and I've been in these, where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. That's how much the wind and the snow, that's whiteout conditions, the whiteout or blackout, and you just can't see. So it's very dangerous to go out. The roads are slippery. So they just tell people, don't even go out. If you call 911, nobody's going to go rescue you because we're not going to be able to find you. There's nobody that can go out in these conditions. So don't go out. Don't take a walk with your dog even, because you won't find your way back home. Just stay wherever you are. Those are the conditions. And so this happened. I mean, this really happened. And then the Northeast got labeled. If you were any place up in the Northeast, you got waves of these snowstorms where it just piled up and piled up and piled up, and then maybe a day would go by and it would start over again. But the Jupiter winds, because of this alignment with Jupiter, it happens about every 13 months. And this particular Jupiter wind was very special because we had the new moon passing and we had little Mercury trigger mechanisms. So if you want more information on that, listen to my show last week. Okay. Here's another event relative to solar system activity that's coming up in March 22nd to be specific, will be the next inferior conjunction of Venus with Earth. That's when Venus, the planet inside of us, between us and the sun, is directly aligned with the sun. And going back to the Chinese, first noticed this in around 1200 AD, that there was always a wave of flu, what they called the swine flu, or the bird flu, and this occurred regularly on the inferior conjunction of Venus. It is also in the medical books, peer-reviewed publications in the medical journals that corroborate this story, but nobody seems to know why. So I'll be explaining why that is, but just briefly, once again, this is part of my work, is that Venus is still acting as a comet. And in the SOHO satellite, the Solar Observatory's heliospheric observatory satellite, we have seen Venus, what I call go comet, where it'll actually erupt into a comet. There was a comet just recently in the last couple of years that went very close to Venus and erupted as it came in contact with Venus's electrical discharge of the solar capacitor, which, by the way, I predicted also. And of course, the astronomical community refuses to acknowledge such things, that as they sit in their ivory towers, buffered by any criticism from afar. But the Venus inferior conjunction, what happens is Venus is still producing a tail, and Earth, during the inferior conjunction, Earth passes through that tail, and it's a little bit after the exact inferior conjunction, but it's very close. And so what does that have to do with anything? Well, what happens is, I'll just throw in another little piece of data here, because I already knew this. I've been talking about this phenomena for decades, called the Venus inferior conjunction flu. And what happens in the tail of comets, they're actually producing nucleotides of proteins. And this was actually measured with the Deep Impact spacecraft that went through the tail of a comet, picked up tail material from a comet, and lo and behold, there they are, the proteins, basic protein and protein pieces forming in the tails of comets. And so what happens is that those are what we call flu viruses. And so if you're in a tropical area, if it's been dry for a while and then all of a sudden it rains, which happens in springtime, this March 22nd date, all of a sudden you will have the dust in the air has this bacteria, and well, it's not really bacteria, it's, I don't know what you call it, it's basic biological fundamental building blocks, and people react to it. What happens is your immune system reacts to it and says, hey, this is not part of the system here, and it tries to get rid of it. And that's what the flu is. It's your body reacting, your immune system reacting to this foreign material that's coming in. And so then, I can't go into the other aspects of this relative to, there's certain things I can't talk about on the show because not allowed. Not permitted, let's put it that way. But anyway, getting back to the reality, this is in the medical journals. And so if you start feeling ill around March 22nd or a little bit after that, and everybody around you, and they're sneezing and coughing and wheezing and everything like that, good chance you got some of this material that came in through the inferior conjunction of Venus. and which I call the inferior conjunction of Venus flu. I'll be talking more about this in future shows as that time frame gets closer and going into a bit more detail. Okay, so the topic I've been trying to get to over the last couple of weeks, but I keep getting interrupted by things like the Jupiter winds or the other issues we've been talking about here. But space treaties. This is a huge topic, and there's no way I'm going to be able to cover this in one show, let alone the last 20 minutes of this show. So anyway, I'm just going to talk about this, some of the main points that you won't hear when this is discussed. But the United Nations is in on the game. They have an Office of Space Affairs where they have regular meetings, and they talk about the use of space for friendly purposes, etc. But what's strange, let's just put it that way, is that they don't talk about things that we know are happening, such as chemtrails, such as the control of weather manipulation using laser satellites. That's a development that has been in use since the early 2000s by the United States. It was protested directly to the United Nations from Russian scientists in about the year 2001. And the reason I know about that is because I happen to be part of it. Just to remind you, when I talk about things on this show, or my radio show, or if I'm on an interview someplace, it's because I was there, I was part of it, I had firsthand information. It's not because I read it on somebody's web page or in a book someplace, whatever. It's because I have personal information relative to these issues. And so let me just give that as an example. The development of the control of hurricanes and understanding what causes hurricanes, not warm water. What a ridiculous thing they're pawning off on you, the public, that somehow hurricanes are formed by warm water. Absolutely absurd. Let me give you an example. Say you, like a lot of times it's easy to teach physics principles in terms of kind of like parables or examples. Say you saw a car going down the street for the first time. You never had seen a car before. You understand physics and the laws of motion a little bit, but you'd never seen an automobile go down the road before. So somebody says to you, what's making the car go down the road? So you look at the car, you look at the external, you see the tailpipe coming out, and there's exhaust coming out of the tailpipe. And your immediate reaction is, oh, there must be gases coming out the tailpipe, and that's pushing the car down the road. And of course, that's not what's going on. But after a little bit further investigation, you go up to the tailpipe, you measure the amount of air coming out the tailpipe, and you go, wow, there's not enough air coming out this tailpipe to push this big heavy car down the road, let alone a truck or a semi or anything else. Got to be something else going on here. So in terms of physics, you say this is conservation of momentum, conservation of energy. You use your principles of physics to say, well, no, it can't be the air coming out of the tailpipe. Something else is going on. So you go out to the front, you pop the hood, and you go, whoa, there's a big engine in here. And it's the gas coming out the tailpipe is just a byproduct of this big engine. It's got a transmission connected to the wheels, and it's burning. You got a tank underneath here that we couldn't see that has gasoline in it, and gasoline has thermal energy of such and such per gallon. You can go 30 miles on a gallon of gasoline with this big engine. That's what's making the car to go down the road. Okay, so let's do the same thing with hurricanes. Okay, the storm systems roll off the west coast of Africa out into the Atlantic, or they might form in the Pacific Ocean. Typically a storm system, and then you have in the hurricane season you have what are called cumulonimbus clouds. These are the big puffy clouds that balloon up, that blossom up into the sky, going up, very high up in the air. They can be tens of thousands of feet up in the air, and so they roll out over the Atlantic Ocean And now all of a sudden they're over warm water. So the standard theory of hurricane development is that the warm water evaporating, it creates this warm water, creates the heat rising, creates a cyclonic movement, the Coriolis force, and that's what causes the hurricane. But then let's do the same kind of analysis. Let's look at the temperature drop of the ocean when the hurricane passes over and compare it to the amount of energy in the hurricane. It's about 1,000,000 times short of the amount of energy. So the evaporation of water and the cooling that the water experiences as the hurricane moves over is a secondary effect. It's kind of like the exhaust coming out the tailpipe of a car. It's not enough to make the hurricane, because you can calculate, if you look in the hurricane and you look at the wind speed and the water, and the mass of the water and the air, and you calculate the energy that is in the hurricane, and then as it comes in towards the eye, you're dealing with 100, 150 or more mile-an-hour winds, and you have this mass moving at that. This is energy, and not only that, it's sustained energy. Something is causing this storm to maintain this day after day after day, as in that it actually builds. And so if you calculate the heat loss as the ocean cools, as the hurricane moves over, and you actually make that simple energy calculation, it's off by about a factor of 1,000,000 or more. That's just in round numbers. So that cannot be what's causing the hurricane, but that's what they'll tell you. The reason they'll tell you that is because they don't want the public to know the real source of the hurricane, which we could also tap into to drive our economy with energy that exists in the atmosphere. It's called the vertical electric field. It's what Tesla was using. That's why they tore the Tesla tower down. They didn't want you to know about it, because they want to sell you energy. Energy is the biggest commodity on the planet. There was a recent interview with Trump, and they're explaining to him that energy is 20% of the economy, of the money that is spent. And so that if you buy a loaf of bread at the store, if the price of energy goes up, then that loaf of bread costs more, the transportation to get it there, the grinding of the grain, everything that goes into that loaf of bread is energy. And if you drop the price of energy by 50% or 80% or 100%, nearly 100%, all of a sudden the cost of goods and services and everything else is going to drop way down, because you're not paying the piper, the energy man. And so the richest people in the world are energy people, and guess what? That's why they don't like my wind generator, because it's going to solve the energy problem using wind, something that is out there every day, like at the South Pole. I just showed you the map. That's enough energy to drive our economy for free once the infrastructure is set up. No more oil, no more middleman, no more, and there are going to be people making money off it, because you don't know somebody that's going to build this big rig to go out and capture the energy and transport hydrogen. It's going to take big investors, but they don't want to de-invest in the oil system that they have running today. All of the rich people on the planet have a finger in energy, whether it's oil, petroleum, coal, nuclear, etc. There's a lot of money there, and they don't want to see that cash cow go away and go to something. That's why the Westinghouse and J.P. Morgan tore down Tesla's work, because he was on to something. He was going to provide free cost energy. It's not free energy. Don't mix those words. People running around the internet jumping up and down saying free energy, like you put a box on the table and all this energy flows in. No, sorry, that's a different thing. That's not. We're not talking free energy. We're talking free cost energy, wind. And in fact, that's one of the big disinformation ploys, is that there is no free energy. Well, there is, but you got to go out and get it and transport it and change it, convert it into some kind of storage medium, which would be hydrogen. Okay, so getting back to the cause of the hurricane. The cause of the hurricane is the vertical electric field it discharges to the top of those clouds, those cumulonimbus clouds coming off Africa, and they're already connected You see all the lightning coming across Africa. It's like Florida, just lightning, lightning, lightning. And so what it's happening is those lightning bolts are hitting ground. And so there's a vertical electric connection between the ionosphere and ground physically when these storms are moving over Africa. When it rolls out into the Atlantic, then there's no more ground. The water is not a good conductor, and so so what happens is the water is not a good conductor like ground. It's not going to accept that electrical current. So what happens is it starts to ionize the air above the ocean, this moist layer of air above the ocean. And that becomes part of the electrical circuit. And so as that starts to connect up to the vertical electric field, you have the positive ionized material at the surface of the ocean. And as it starts to rise up, and you can actually see this from satellite photographs, you see the very tallest cumulonimbus clouds, and the eye starts to form there. And all of a sudden it starts to spin, and what's the spinning? It's as this electrical current comes up, the Coriolis force causes it to spin. It spins in the counterclockwise direction in the northern hemisphere and the clockwise direction in the southern hemisphere. I think I got that right. Yeah, I think that's correct. But anyway, the point is that is what's causing the hurricane, and it's that electrical current that is driving the hurricane and causing the low pressure cell at the bottom. And what happens with the low pressure cell when all the air is rushing in? That's another reason why this warm water theory of hurricanes can't work, is because if just left to its own devices, the hurricane would dissipate in a couple hours with that amount of wind. There's something there that has to continue to maintain it. And at the energy level, that is necessary to produce that hurricane and drive more. So anyway, when I'm working with the Russian scientists, we figure this out. They're looking at my work, and we understand. They're atmospheric scientists. They're seeing tornadoes on the sun. My work explains what happens, what's causing the tornadoes on the sun 10 years before NASA ever saw them. And so we figure out what's causing the hurricanes and driving them. So now all of a sudden you can figure out how to redirect the hurricane with a laser satellite. So you put a laser on one corner of the eye of the hurricane, causing the discharge to move in that direction. And you can literally drag a hurricane around like a bull with a ring in the nose. And so the other thing you can do is, since you know that when the hurricane makes landfall, what is it doing? What causes the hurricane to dissipate? And that is because it's discharging to land. So when it comes into Florida, you see the tornadoes on the leading edge of the hurricane, which do a lot of damage. Those tornadoes are caused by the electrical discharges on the leading edge of the hurricane. So there's two things you can do. You can have laser satellites that redirect the hurricane and move it away from harm's way, away from land, and put it out in the middle of the ocean, where then you let it dissipate slowly. Or you can put a series of buoys offshore on the continental shelf off of Florida or the Carolinas or wherever, or in the Gulf of Mexico or off of New Orleans, wherever, and just have an airplane fly over, or a boat. If you know the hurricane is coming, you drop these buoys. They're anchored to the floor a couple 100 feet down with conducting anchors, and then you have weather balloons on a tether that go up a few 100 feet up in the air, maybe about 500 feet, and you just have an array of these. So when the hurricane comes in, it shorts out offshore and it dumps all this water. So you dissipate the hurricane offshore. And all of these are available. And this information was given to the U.S. military, because Russia doesn't have hurricanes. They don't have a problem with hurricanes. They're inland. And so the idea was to benefit the United States, which has hurricanes, and to stop this whole issue with hurricanes. Okay, so what does the U.S. military do? They weaponize it. They turn it into a weapon. And so the Russians, this is in about 2001, the Russian scientists from the atmospheric scientists go to the United Nations and they say, hey, United Nations, United States has these weapons of mass destruction that can be used against civilian populations, and we want them classified as weapons of mass destruction and outlawed. So the UN wrote up a treaty, and the United States would not sign it, as they have not signed any treaties for weather control. And so this gets back to the issue of space treaties, and which I'm going to be talking about extensively, probably in upcoming shows. But understand that this is what's been going on. So you have big hurricanes, and I think finally the general public is waking up with this Hurricane Helene, which was doing fantastic things for a hurricane, things that hurricanes have never done before, causing extensive damage to the population areas of the United States, and then followed by this other hurricane that was coming into Florida. And since the year 2000, Katrina was a manipulated hurricane to destroy and cut out depopulate the regions of New Orleans. So anyway, how does this relate to space treaties? Well, who controls this? Why is the state of Tennessee passing legislation to prevent chemtrails? And this brings up a very important point. Who is the controller of airspace over the states? Tennessee is passing a law to control its airspace to prevent chemtrails. Where's the federal government in all of this? Are they complicit? What about the U.S. Air Force? Aren't they supposed to be protecting our airspace for the safety of citizenry? You know, there are a lot of big questions here. And when you get to UN treaties about space, it's all flower and fluff and what would you call it? Just homogenizing the topics to make it sound like holy. Let's just put it that way. But really, they're not cutting to the chase of the problems that they know exist. The control of weather, the control of severe storms that are weaponized and used against the population. Who's doing this? Well, it's clearly the U.S. military. And people say, well, it might be Russia. People say it could be Russia or some other, insane person. Well, if it is, then where's our U.S. military that's supposed to be protecting us from this? Where are they? Off at the bar drinking? I mean, excuse me, the story doesn't add up. And so the end result is that the U.S. military has weaponized the control of cyclonic storms, and it gets to the point of controlling climate. This is another huge issue where they can control low pressure cells to drag hot air from the equator up into, say, the United States. And so everybody's going, oh, it's hotter and hotter and hotter. And when it's really being manipulated. And it's very cold, but they don't announce that. They don't announce that it's very cold in those parts of the world to make up for the extra heat that's in the United States. And of course, everybody believes it because it's hot outside. Okay, well, I'll be talking about these topics in future episodes, so make sure you are here to listen and tell your friends so these shows start going viral. That's what we need, is push this information out to the public.
This has been Master of Science with host James McCanney. Join us each week as James will delve into historical figures such as Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the great mathematicians as we explore the history of man, Earth, and our universe as you've never seen it before. Tuesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.